Hello everyone, my name is Christa Tonzo, and today we're going to talk about the Philippine Constitution. So, when we talk about Constitution, it basically means the basic principle and law of one nation. In our country, we have a Constitution. So, there are three kinds of constitutions. First is the Constitution of Liberty, second, the Constitution of Government, and third is the Constitution of Sovereignty. So, we're going to talk about is the Constitution of Liberty, or also known as the Bill of Rights, which is found in Article 3 and it has 22 sections. But what is the Bill of Rights? So, Bill of Rights is the most important part to know our rights as a Filipino citizen of our country, because when we know our rights as a Filipino, then we can protect ourselves from the violence or abuse of the government and or any individual. So what will happen if there is no Bill of Rights? Well, it is most likely that any servant from the government or any individual can do whatever he or she may want, such as arresting for no reason. In Section 1, it means that no one is allowed to kill a person without due process from the court. When we talk about life, it's not just about breathing and living, but also taking care of our body. So if one part of our body is cut, such as our hand, feet, or making a person's eye become blind, then that is an act against the law. In liberty, it talks about doing whatever we want to do without any intervention from the government, such as playing video games, watching TV, walking through the park, studying, and etc., as long as it is not against the law. In property, it talks about having the rights to do things and do whatever we want with our things, such as selling or using them for ourselves. Again, as long as it is not against the law, then it is okay. In Section 2, it talks about that a person cannot arrest or do a search from a person's body and as well as from their house if there is no search warrant that the police can present to you. Though there are times that a person can do or attempt a search, such as inspecting an establishment, whether that establishment is following health protocols and standards. If they found illegal things such as drugs, then they can do a thorough search even without the search warrant, because those illegal things that they have found can be served as the evidence to do a search on their establishment. Another example for an exemption for search is a checkpoint. I think all of us have experienced checkpoints when we're riding a jeepney or riding a private vehicle. There will be officers looking through our windows, but their vision can only be limited. They cannot put their flashlights inside the private vehicle or inside the car, because that can be invasive. Because when doing a checkpoint, it should be not invasive. And another is when a person allows the police officers to do a search on his or her body. When that person gives his or her consent to do a search on his body, then that's the time that the police officer can do a search on his body or her. In Section 3, it talks about the privacy of communication and correspondence, in which the government can open, read, or even listen to the Filipino citizens' private message. such as text and conversation. Another is it is illegal to use evidence such as private messages that are obtained or in illegal ways, such as frequently recording without the knowledge of the other party. The only exemption for this is when there is an order from the court or to do so or to record so. In section 4, it talks about that the Filipino citizen has the right to have freedom of speech and expression because these are the traits of being a democratic country. There are two aspects when it comes to our right in speaking. First is the freedom of censorship or kalayaan sa censorship. Second is the right to express our opinion when it comes to certain issues. In right to assemble, this talks about that the people are allowed to assemble or get together in order to express their frustrations. If we think about it, it is actually better for them to assemble because the government will be able to know what they should do or what they should change instead of just listening to one individual person. In section 5, it talks about the freedom of religion. The Philippine Constitution allows Filipino citizens to have the right to choose their own religion and no biases or favoritism when it comes to religion in the Philippines. If we notice that in our country, we have several religions here, right? So, the first that we've known is the Roman Catholic, Christians, Protestants, born again, and Muslims. I think there are several more religions in our country, but I don't know them. But I don't know all of them. Though in section 5 there is an exceptions. These are when a person who worships needs to fire a house or that might cause harm to other people, then that is illegal. In section 6, it is the liberty or of abode and the right to travel. It talks about that the Filipino citizens have the right to travel anywhere without the intervention of the government from stopping us. Though there are exceptions when a certain person has been suspended from traveling because of certain reasons. The reasons might be because there is a war that is happening, rebellion, or disease that is contagious such as the coronavirus that we're currently experiencing. In section 7, the right of matters and information of public concerns. This right talks about that the Filipino citizens have the right to look and read public information that is being recorded by the government for the public. This right is only exclusive for Filipino citizens and not for foreigners. Though there is another exception for this, and this is when the foreigners are able to use public information when they need it for court or for their case. This section will help the people to be involved in the politics, though not all information can be open to all Filipino, especially the income tax return, military fund, and other confidential information. In section 8, it is related to self-expression in where the citizens have the choice to join a union or a group. For example, is joining an animal welfare organization. This is an organization in which this group interferes issues about animal abuse. Though there is also an exemption when forming a group that is illegal, such as forming a group for doing bad deeds. In section 9, it talks about that the government has the power to take away a property to be used to the public. This is called power of eminent domain. The power of eminent domain is held by the Congress, but that can also be part of the President, sangguniang bayan, or by the quasi-public-private corporations such as the PLDT. When taking private properties, the reason should be to be used for the public and not for personal reasons. Another is that the owner of that said property should be justly compensated. Lastly is it should go through due process when taking the said property. Section 10, no law shall be passed by the government that would affect the existing contract. An example for this is when two parties entered into a contract with terms and conditions, but in the next year there is a law that has been passed by the government. Because of this, there is a possibility that the terms and conditions between two parties have to change because of that law. But if that contract's terms and conditions does not affect the public interest and moral, then that contract that they have signed is still valid. So in section 11, it talks about that a person shouldn't be denied by the court just because of poverty. There shouldn't be any sense. There wouldn't be any sense to have right if a person is denied the chance for them to defend themselves just because they're poor. So section 11 of Bill of Rights is passed in order to give chance for the people in the lower class to have their free service to defend themselves, such as public attorney. Section 12, this is about the Miranda Rights. I think we've all heard about in the movies this kind of sentence. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to speak to an attorney and to have an attorney present during any questioning. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be provided for you at a government expense. In this section, the defendant has the right to remain silent, but they also have the right to have an attorney. If they cannot provide one, then the government can also provide one for them. In this section, torturing, threats to the defendant isn't allowed in order for them to get a confession, because it is being forced, right? If there are proofs that the defendant has been tortured or threatened, then the defendant's confession can be void and can also get compensation. Section 13, it is about the right to bail. Bail is the amount of money that the defendants must give in order to be released from custody. But there are exceptions when it comes to right to bail. And those are when the person's guilt is too strong or too heavy for them to be bailed out. This is like the person would deposit money in exchange for them to be released from the custody. The money that they've deposited will stay and the defendant can be released. So it's like exchanging position, right? So the money will be only returned once the case has already ended, whether the defendant is guilty or not. Section 14, it talks about the right to due process. The defendant has the right to defend his side. One of the right of the defendant is presumption of innocence. In the Philippines, every defendants are assumed to be innocent as long as they're not proved to be guilty. Second is the right to be heard by himself or counsel. This refers to have an attorney to defend the defendant. And third is the right to know what are the accusations of the defendant. Fourth is the speedy, impartial, and public trial. This talks about justice being delayed. The longer it is being delayed, the longer the suffering of the defendant. It is right that a judge to hear the trial or case of the defendant, that there is no bias present when hearing the trial or case. Section 15, writ of habeas corpus. So habeas corpus is a Latin word meaning to produce the body. This means that the servant or disciple of the law that arrests a certain person has the responsibility to bring the person to the court along with the evidence against that person. The privilege of writ of habeas corpus is created to serve as a protection for the Filipino citizen if one should be arrested without any evidence. Though this privilege can be suspended if the person is involved in rebellion or conquest, the person can still be brought to court even though the privilege of writ of habeas corpus is suspended, and can also be stopped by the arresting official and asked if that person is really worthy of being arrested. Be mindful that the writ of habeas corpus are only for those people who are suspicious, because those people might have been involved in a rebellion or a conquest. Section 16. In this section, people have the right to have fast clarity about their case. It is important that the court gives fast and clear clarity about their case, because we have to remember that justice delayed is justice denied. Another reason is it strengthens the trust of the Filipino citizen towards our government. According to Article 8, there should be a timeline or deadline that we have to follow. For the Supreme Court, there is a need to have a decision within 24 months. For the Court of Appeals, the decision should be made within 12 months. And for the lower courts, there is 3 months for a decision to be made. Section 17, this section talks about the right not to testify against themselves. Why? Because there are several reasons why they shouldn't force a person to testify against themselves. One is, there is a huge possibility that they would lie in order for them to be saved. They would lie to save themselves. Two is that there is a possibility of abuse coming from the servant of law to force them to testify against themselves. In section 18, it talks about that so in section 18, there are 2 paragraphs. First paragraph is, no person shall be detained solely by reason of his political beliefs and aspirations. 2, no involuntary servitude in any form shall exist except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. So let's talk a little about our history in the Philippines. On September 21, 1972, our former President Ferdinand Marcos declared the Batas Militar to the Philippines. In those times, there were several people arrested because of political beliefs and critics. Even the ordinary people who were only joking about the policy were arrested. Because of this bitter experience by the Filipino citizen, they were able to pass Section 18 of the Bill of Rights. In this section, a person can't be arrested just because of different beliefs in politics. The people can also express their thoughts even though they're contrary or through social media is not against the law. Though they're contrary or against the government without being arrested. An example of this is posting our thoughts through social media is not against the law, but we have to remember that we should be responsible for our posts on social media, because if a person persuades us to do illegal things, that can be bad for our country. Second is our right against involuntary servitude. This talks about being forced to do something. This kind of action is not allowed in our country, and as well as slavery. A person who is willing to serve in order to pay a debt is also illegal, no matter what, no matter how willing that person is, that is still illegal. This kind of action is called peonage. Though there is also an exemption when it comes to this, it is when a person has to serve because of their punishment. An example of this is the community service. Another is when our government needs the people in order to defend our country. The third is when a parent is telling their children to do something that their children are capable of doing so, such as their daily house chores. Section 19 talks about the prohibition of imposition of fines, because we have to keep in mind the heaviness of their crime and the ability for them to pay their fines. For the punishment of crime, it is not allowed in the Philippine Constitution to have their punishment mixed with torture, threats, and the cause of slow death, such as drowning, burning the person, and cutting their body parts. It is also not allowed to have a punishment that might cause the dignity of a person to be destroyed. In the Philippines, there is no death penalty. However, the death penalty can be brought anytime by Congress for crimes that are heinous. When we say heinous crimes, those are crimes that are heavy, such as murder, rape. So it is most likely like the community no longer feels safe because of that certain person. For people with heavy crimes, their sentence can be lowered by 40 to 20 years imprisonment because of reclusion perpetua. It is also the responsibility of the officers to provide food, medicine, and recreation for prisoners in prison. Always remember that the Bureau of Corrections can give a rehabilitation in order for the prisoners to fix their actions. Section 20, a person can be arrested because of not being able to pay their debts or poll tax on time. It is not right to arrest a person just because of not being able to pay for their debt. As long as they are not fooling with their money, then they shouldn't be arrested, because the government see this as an act of being poor. So, and it is also not fair for the people, because this would have a big effect only for the poor people. Section 21, this section is mostly known as right against double jeopardy. This right talks about that if a person is filed because of a case, then was proved that they're not guilty, then that person can no longer be filed against with the same accusation. This section protects the people from being accused twice because of the same reason. In section 22, ex post facto and bill of attainder is not allowed in the Philippines. Why? Let us get to know what is ex post facto law. This law is a law that can be filed an action against that person even before it can be written. An example for this is when a person did a criminal act, but during that time, it's not yet considered as a criminal act. But in the upcoming year, there was a law that has been passed that the action of that certain person was illegal. Then that person can be called guilty even before the law has been written. Second is the bill of attainder, which is a legislative act that gives punishment to people without litigation of the court. An example of this is to strip a certain person from his or her property, not because of doing illegal things, but because of the need to litigate the person from court. And because of the bill of attainder, it is possible for a person to be imprisoned even without due process. Thus, ex post facto law and bill of attainder is not allowed in the Philippines. And there are several more articles concerning about the rights of a labor, right as a woman, most likely our rights as a human, and there is also a right to protect the people living in our country, such as social justice, human rights. and also protecting our children, the children who, or the younger generation from cruelty, from being from not having to experience basic needs in their life such as food, water, shelter, and basic education. And we also have to know that that we have our duties and responsibilities as a Filipino citizen. One is to defend our country from enemies and invaders. Two, pay his or taxes willingly and promptly. Be loyal to our country. Take care and preserve our natural resources. Keep our surroundings clean by cleaning our environment. Study well and become a productive individual. Obey our law. Become a good citizen by abiding our law and maintaining peace and order in our community, preserving the Filipino culture and identity, participate actively in various government programs, vote wisely and choose candidates who can serve the people in our country, not just because they talk well, but because they can lead and have patriotism in their hearts. 12 is to respect the rights of other people. Thank you, that's all.